Because of a near-fatal encounter with stray dogs, this little white-tailed deer's future would be in our hands. We could never replace his real mother, but would do everything possible to be the next best thing. Teaching him how to eventually take care of himself in the wild with other deer was to be a constant daily challenge. During our time of giving him the love, care, and attention all living creatures should have, he would steal our hearts more completely than we could ever have imagined. Buck, as we named him, would share his young life with us, using our sheltered yard, surrounding natural woodland and the tree-edged fields as his home territory. Our house would also surprisingly become a much used and familiar place to him. We know that as deer grow and mature, they can become unpredictable and sometimes dangerous. Raising these beautiful little animals is a serious responsibility that can never be taken lightly. His bonding with us was quick and strong. Dividing his attention evenly, he knew Shirley was his foster mother, and I was to be his assistant guardian. For his first 2 weeks, he would accept his rich milk formula from no one but Shirley. Although he had several resting places in our house, his night sleeping place for his first 2 weeks was a soft mat on the floor beside our bed. Here we could easily reach to comfort him when he became worried and wanted to know we were still with him. Even at this very young age, we could see his sharp little mind would have many surprises for us. When he needed his milk or had to go to the bathroom, he would wake us by nuzzling our face with his tiny, cool black nose. His first outside daytime hiding and resting spot was in the middle of a large clump of tall ferns growing on the shady north side of our house. His natural instincts told him when he needed sunlight. Then he carefully moved from his shaded fern bed to lie in the bright sun. He always chose to lie beside a distracting object where he would not be easily recognized as a little sleeping fawn. With help from us, pretending to graze on grass with our hands, Buck learned to eat small bits of different plants. He liked the small tender leaves of dandelions best of all. However, his milk bottle would be very important to him for a long time. We got used to knowing when he would be hungry. Then, when called, he would come for his lunch break. He was always in a hurry when the feeding notion hit him. He wasn't very big when he began to make his exercise runs around our house and yard. He knew he needed to develop and strengthen his rapidly growing body, but this didn't stop him from wanting to be carried once in a while. He was learning to eat bigger plants, like alfalfa, if we encouraged him to try it. Buck was a contented young fellow enjoying plenty of resting and friendly times with us, with no problem getting all the attention he wanted while charming his way into our hearts. His sense of smell grew keener every day, and testing air currents for friendly or dangerous situations was a caution he had inherited from his white-tailed deer ancestry. If he became worried, his movements were careful and unnoticeable. As Buck grows older and bigger, he tries to eat almost anything. Even some not-so-edible things are swallowed. He especially likes green lettuce and celery, and being hand-fed makes the flavor all the better. His regular exercise runs are showing how strong and healthy he is. After his run, he spends some time with Shirley in the shade of a large maple tree close to our house. He is becoming quite curious about what's happening around his home grounds. He could seldom resist coming over to check out our cameras. While other animal activity draws his attention, we see how each day he grows more beautiful. If he was going to know all about his home territory, Buck had to do a lot of investigating. Once he checked out something different, he never forgot it. Nor could we do anything about having him right in the middle of it. As usual, he was forever nibbling on all kinds of plants and spitting out the bad-tasting ones. He also ate pure dirt in certain places, knowing there was something he needed to add to his diet. We could only guess at what some of his actions meant, like tossing his head back close to us or flicking out his tongue in our faces. He is becoming more interested in everything around him. including the different kinds of shrubs and bushes around our yard. He is also beginning to pretend he's a big buck when playing with us. As time went on, our little friend found more places to hide and sleep further away from our house. One well-hidden deer bed was in a patch of tall mixed grass and alfalfa, under the low branches of a small plum tree, only a few steps from the edge of our driveway. Vehicles could drive by, or someone could even walk by without him moving. But if anybody stopped to look his way, he knew he'd been discovered and would slowly get up to move to a more secluded spot. It was easy to walk within a few steps of his hiding place without seeing him. The light-spotted reddish-brown color of their coats blends so well with their surroundings, and being nearly odorless, predators such as coyotes have difficulty finding these little animals. Other wild animal friends that live in and around our yard and farmland keep Buck company. This female Franklin ground squirrel is carrying nest material to a den where her babies will soon be born. Buck had started following us away from the house yard. From now on, he would be steadily expanding his territory. He seldom passed up an opportunity to play, and the snowshoe hares that live close by, paying no attention to his antics while they feed on tender grass. Shirley's cup of coffee has an interesting aroma, but it doesn't taste very good to a young deer. He would rather play. His games were getting a little rough. We will have to stop sparring with him this way before he unintentionally hurts someone with his sharp, dagger-like hooves. Shirley is reminded when his hungry tummy is calling for food. He follows her inside where his milk is prepared, then back outside to enjoy the good stuff. Walking up onto the deck to check things out became a daily activity for our inquisitive young deer. The young Franklin ground squirrels have quickly grown big enough to venture out of their den and find food for themselves. Everything they do is under the watchful eye of their mother. Buck's perky little tail was a good indication of how happy he was to be tagging along with us and finding something new to do. Washing the car was one of those interesting things that he could not ignore. Wherever he was along his bush trails away from the yard, he would be here in minutes when washing begins. He would always keep close track of all our activities. Although we never found any sign of parasites on him, he really liked being brushed and groomed. His hair was becoming coarser and warmer. He sometimes had an itchy spot or a fly bothering him. He did his best to return the favor by licking our hands. After coming into the house to hurry up his lunch, he stands on his hind legs to get at it. His long legs and body show how well fed he is and how fast he's grown. After lunch, we all go for a walk to see what else is happening around the yard and along the bush trails. Buck could make a game out of anything. He turns his attention to a pair of running shoes, chewing on laces in order to bite off and swallow the plastic lace ends. When he finishes, he tries to get up onto Shirley's lap to rub noses and lick her face. No matter what kind of plant he discovers, he just has to taste it, and he quickly acquires a taste for our tame roses. After this flowery snack, he walks over to watch a couple of snowshoe hares and strikes a beautiful pose for our camera along the way. By now, Buck could recognize any one of our vehicles within half a mile of home and would usually beat us to the house to greet us from wherever he might be. His latest daytime resting place was moved a little further away to a small field of alfalfa about 100 yards from our house. He knows he is well hidden from potential enemies while still able to see, hear, and smell anything that could mean harm to him before it gets too close. How long Shirley will be able to carry him is a good question. He's growing fast, but still wants to be treated like a baby fawn. Stretching for something just out of reach and having long rests are all part of his daily activities. Our fridge was just as important to him as to us. He knew it was the place where all kinds of good food came from, and he can hardly wait to get into his food bucket. At least once a day, usually in the morning, we would brush him from head to foot. He enjoyed this so much that he hardly moved, except to repay us by licking our hands. It was easy to tell when he wanted his lunch. His convincing ways always worked, and he would come from the yard or nearby woods and stand up on his hind legs for a special treat. We never knew when the notion to have a good run might hit him. After this run, he satisfies his sweet tooth by licking on a hard candy. Playing and dancing in a fresh summer rain puddle was something Buck would do a lot of. After this little workout, he has to be brushed again, adding in some scratching of his own if we missed an itchy spot. His daytime resting places are changing. Now he would lay quite far from the yard, and he has to be more cautious about giving himself away. His natural survival instincts are growing stronger. We never knew when we would see him walking back from his hiding places. Even so, he likes to be close to us, sharing his friendly visits many times a day. One morning, when we went to call him for breakfast, he was not feeling good. He could hardly take his bottle without extra help, and stayed in our house to rest in his first sleeping place beside our bed for 2 days. With plenty of tender care, he was soon feeling as good and frisky as ever, and got into everything we did as usual. His nose was his main investigating equipment, using it to check out anything that interested him. His search for new and exciting food items included our rose bushes, and they became a regular meal for his inquisitive taste buds. As our garden grew, it took up a lot of Buck's time, although he did not eat much of it. He wanted to be with us, digging potatoes and gathering other vegetables, while trying out all the different flavors, especially the cucumbers. Washing vegetables always attracted our nosy little pal. If he managed to get a nice lunch out of it, all the better. This time it's green beans, one of his favorites. He would often follow his sensitive nose into our house to have a feed of these good things. With his stomach full, we would see him casually saunter off to find a quiet place to lay where he could survey his farmyard home. As Buck grew and became more self-reliant, we made sure he had every opportunity to learn all about the natural foods, such as twigs, leaves, and wild fruit, that would eventually be his main diet in both summer and winter. He liked to find us and have a snack when we walked in the bush. On one of our walks, he had discovered how well he could hide in a grain field, and this barley field, about 300 yards from our house, became his night resting place until harvest was completed. His little hooves could carry a lot of mud and had to be cleaned if he intended to come in the house. He liked to meet with our family and others who came by to see him, usually laying down close by and enjoying a taste of candy or cookies. After a little visit and brushing, he picks up and swallows a few small pebbles, then moves on to find a quiet, shady spot to lay. He did not like noise of any kind. Every rain puddle interested him. The water must have felt good on his feet, and wet pebbles were nice to chew on for some reason. As wild fruit like Saskatoon berries ripened, he was sure to get his share of these tasty lunches. It was now a regular part of our early morning activities to go out to the edge of Buck's barley field and call him to come for his breakfast. Then, wagging his little tail, he followed us to our yard. We could also find him in this field during the daytime. Usually, he came out to where we stood to visit and walk with us. He was a happy tag-along, and we were glad to have him with us whenever he wished. Our pockets always carried a good supply of different kinds of food to give him, and he always knew we had them. It was such a privilege to have and love a little wild animal like Buck. Sometimes Buck's interest in different kinds of food gave him a little trouble. He liked peanuts, but peanut butter stuck to the roof of his mouth, which kept his long tongue busy getting rid of it. Whenever he played in water, he seemed to be acting like a real smarty with his perky tail held straight up most of the time. He liked having us watch him, and was even more playful and able to show us what a jaunty, lively young animal he was. He felt he should have something good to eat after his playing, and fresh apples cut up and fed to him by hand were just perfect. He tried peanut butter again with no better results and gave it up. We could always count on Buck's help when the bird ponds needed cleaning and refilling with fresh water. He would make anything we did more interesting with his playful ways. His long walks in our small natural woodlands always piqued Buck's interest. We could see how quickly and easily he was fitting into his natural environment, wanting to examine everything with his sharp eyes, nose, and ears, as well as tasting all the wild plants and fruit. The mixed aspen, poplar, and willow forest is filled with heavy undergrowth, shrubs, and bushes. Fallen, decaying tree trunks and new saplings are essential to survival for numerous wildlife and native plants. Sadly, these beautiful woodlands are rapidly being destroyed. This was one of the first times we saw Buck chewing his cud, as all double-stomached animals do. At these times, he was totally relaxed and contented. It was also relaxing for us to watch and listen to him. His keen nose always knew when there were treats in our pockets. If he could sample these and be brushed at the same time, he'd have it made. Buck had a way of letting us know when he wanted us to go for a walk with him in the natural woodlands that were such an important part of his territory. He would start walking slowly, periodically stopping and waiting for us to come. He also had his own idea about the order we should be in as we walked along the bush trails. Shirley would be first in line, then Buck behind her, and me last. We needed lots of patience, allowing him time to feed and check out many things. He carefully steps along the trail, checking everything that might be edible. The things he liked included both green and dead leaves, many kinds of wild fruit, as well as fungi and moss. Deer spend a great deal of time lying down, and Buck was no exception. While chewing his cud, he brings up a fruit pit or some other hard object to chew. Considering his balanced, broad appetite of twigs, leaves, mixed fruit, vegetables, and grass, it's no wonder he did a lot of cud chewing. It would be difficult to find a more beautiful animal than a young deer. The barley field that he used to hide in and sleep in was ripening to a rich golden color. It was also high enough now for him to be unseen if he kept his head down. When we called him in the morning and he did not show up right away, we wondered if something had happened to him during the night, or if he might be somewhere else. Usually, just as we were ready to give up, we would see his ears sticking up above the grain, then slowly coming toward us, carefully picking his steps along the way. He still liked to play with strange things, including shoes, dancing around in a circle until he tired of the game. If he wasn't around the yard, we knew he would be in the changing summer woods, investigating everything, from fruit to moss and dried leaves. His keen nose also detected the scent of other animals that have traveled along his woodland trails. He often went to lay and rest in the quiet solitude of bush habitat. It was interesting how he could come into our house after his bush country ventures, quickly locate us, and ask for all kinds of food. The list of his favorites included everything from bananas to raisins and peanuts. Even donuts and breakfast cereals were eagerly enjoyed. Buck considered us to be his family and was always happy when we were together, whether it was bird pond cleaning or resting in the shade. But now we could not imagine being without him. In his unassuming way, he would catch up to us going to the garden. A lot of things he liked were easy to find here. Shirley still carried him once in a while, and he did not mind at all. However, he would soon be too big for this. Buck, like all deer, was an early morning animal. As he grew older, he began leaving his field sleeping place on his own, feeding along the way to our house for breakfast. Not long after his early morning feed, he would rest while chewing his breakfast. Buck was truly a member of our family. Not a day went by that one or both of us would not be with him once or twice in his beloved forest habitat. We wanted him to learn the ways of a wild deer. His natural instincts were very evident as he became more at ease and confident in these places. He practiced his boxing on an old blanket hung on our clothesline. In due time, he would be doing this with other deer. We were glad he did not try this on us. We would not have lasted long against his powerful, sharp hooves. We have learned that respect is very important to getting along with any animal. As always, water intrigued him. He simply had to wade and play in every new rain puddle. More and more, he seemed delighted to have us watching him. These playtimes were often followed by a fast run around the yard. He was becoming a lot braver and more likely to be taking longer walks away from our yard at night. We did not always know where he might be in the morning, and called him from different places. Once again, he was in the grain field and came bouncing out to meet us. Then follows us home for a drink of milk. However, he was not satisfied with just having a little lunch, but asked to be let in the house for a look around. We sometimes had to urge him to stop his snooping because he had a habit of chewing up everything, including pencils and paper. Satisfied that everything is okay in the front room, he comes to join us at the breakfast table, where he has no trouble getting a taste of cereal from Shirley's bowl. Before we know what he's up to, we find him stepping back out of our bathtub. From here he goes into our bedroom to look at his first sleeping place between our bed and large window. He is much too big to lay there now. He easily steps onto our bed to stand and look out the window with us. As the days of late summer shorten, we would often meet our young friend coming home at sunrise after a night away with wild deer. Now that our garden was nearly finished growing for the summer, Buck was all the more interested in the work of taking in and washing the vegetables. This was a great way for him to find good things to eat. By now, we could hardly remember when we didn't have him around. As his fawn spots are disappearing and he rapidly grows, we spend more and more time with him in the bush country. With our encouragement, he sharpens his ability to find his natural adult deer food. It was necessary for him to learn to look after himself, since he could not always rely on us to survive. Not only is Buck changing from a summer deer to a winter deer, but other seasonal changes are occurring. Wild geese are practicing their flying, preparing for fall migration. His long, slim legs are growing stronger, and his exercise runs are longer and faster. These runs always deserve a rest in the shade. While he cleans his leg and foot glands, he gets his spotless white tummy brushed. How wonderful this wild friend of ours is. In order to show how Buck grew into a fine, intelligent white-tailed deer, completely able to look after himself, we must continue to take you with us into his bush country. Buck was a most fascinating subject for our cameras as he became wise in the ways of a wild deer. How quickly our little spotted fawn had grown. His heavy gray-tan coat was part of the important preparation that all northern wild animals go through to cope with long, cold Canadian winters. Knowing there would be something good to eat in our pockets, Buck quickly finds the stash of peanuts and raisins. It's time to move on, and in Buck's preferred order, we slowly move along a bush trail that has now become very familiar to our little deer. He must have felt more protected when walking between us. While moving to another part of his small forest, we have to wait while he feeds on leaves, wild fruit, and grass. He could not resist checking out and participating in everyone's activities. Buck decides that it's time for his afternoon rest and walks back to lie down and be groomed. He sometimes looked for parasites, but never found anything except perfectly clean hair and skin. He watches the playing for a while, then comes for a drink of milk, tossing his head like a big buck on the way. If he could have helped us gather the garden vegetables, he would have. We're sure that he thought he was helping us anyway. He was always a busybody who never missed anything that went on around our farm. He must have been paying close attention because he started digging out the potatoes himself and discovered that they were good to eat. He was now only 3 months old, yet seemed so grown up. We all leave the garden together to clean and prepare the freshly gathered vegetables. Naturally, Buck had to help with this as well and manages to get a carrot or two to chew on. Like any mischievous youngster, he could do things that drew our attention, like throwing corn cobs out of a box that were intended for the deep freeze. At times like this, he received a playful spanking, which he completely ignored, knowing full well that we would never hurt him. Instead, he's given a cob of sweet corn to eat. After all this work, he finds a blanket that has fallen to the ground from the clothesline and dances around it for a while. Then we all sit and lay in the shade. These were good times. Buck could easily convey his contentment and affection, and we were always ready to show our love for him. We also knew that as he grew older, his gentle ways would give way to a dangerous change in his temperament. He could become quite unpredictable, especially during the rut or mating season. We were on guard for any sign of this, especially when children or strangers were around, since he had become very possessive about us and his home territory. The woods were changing from summer to autumn, and the colored leaves were a pleasant change from summer's heat, humidity, and thick green foliage. Also, the annoying insects were disappearing, making our bush walks with Buck a real pleasure. We did not like the idea of him leaving to join his wild friends, but this was sure to happen. We just didn't know when. Hopefully, he would be prepared to look after himself when that time came. He was becoming quite sick of us cleaning bird ponds and seemed to want something more exciting to do. A good run around the house and yard was what he had in mind. His long, swift legs now carried him gracefully over or around any obstacle. Whenever our young family members got together for some kind of ball game, Buck was right in the middle of it. At these times, we had to watch him closely. He meant no harm, but his play could get quite rough. After trying the game, he got a bit tired and disgusted, so he would lie down close by to watch and rest. A little time spent brushing would always calm him down and bring back his easygoing nature. After a lunch of fruit, vegetables, and a cookie or two, then everything is all right. We use one of our bedrooms for a quiet place to write and work with our nature photo business. Buck kept a close eye on this activity and was sly enough to sneak a pencil or piece of paper to chew. He could completely demolish a wooden pencil in about 3 seconds. We have always found it easy and rewarding to understand and get along with the many different wild animals that have come into our lives. We will always treasure the fond memories of their fascinating ways. After Buck is finished digging up a few good plant roots, he walks along a bush trail into the woods by himself, where he will meet up with some of his wild friends for a while. Another towel fallen from the clothesline or pulled down by Buck becomes a good reason to play and dance around when he returns from his wild deer visit. We have become used to his habit of regularly lying down to rest, especially after any kind of vigorous activity. Periodically, for some unknown reason, he would decide to put on a big show of disdain and assert his territory towards a little poodle dog that belonged to our family. This little dog could come and go as he liked most of the time, without Buck paying any attention. However, this was one of the times that he had to try ignoring all the fuss that was going on around him. As usual, after this episode is over, Buck takes a rest and chews his latest meal, contented and forgetting all about the dog. Although short-lived, the colors of autumn are a thing of beauty, so we spend as much time enjoying them as possible. Buck just seems to be a perfect part of this time of year. With luck, he will escape the coming hunting season. As we walk down a narrow bush road, he investigates everything while slowly meandering along. With a bit of coaxing and some of his usual treats, he stands on his hind legs to take them from our hand, then on to nibble at all kinds of deer food. His running exercises have turned into a bit of showing off. Finished with his running, he comes in the house for a visit and a snack, then a long rest. In order to be on his level, we would sit or lie beside him like another deer. These were the times we enjoyed his quiet, gentle personality the most. He was always a lovable charmer during his stay with us. No doubt he would become aggressive when his mating desires took over in his second fall rut season. Migrating birds like juncos are finding scattered bits of feed that Buck has spilled from his food containers. It was surprising how big he was and still liked to have his drink of milk from a bottle. It was doing him no harm to be a spoiled young fellow. We were seeing that he could handle both his wild and tame sides of life quite successfully. He liked to play on a small mound of dirt by the edge of our pasture, often playing here by himself, but finding it more fun when one of the horses came over to watch him. He had heard us fastening a length of outdoor rug on our house deck and came walking up to the house to get into the action. It's a good thing he couldn't speak our language. We would never have kept up to his stories. The deck work is finished and it's time to relax and communicate with us in his own way. We were learning to understand him better all the time. From one activity to another, trying to help or just being a nosy little guy didn't matter. We enjoyed every bit of his time with us. Again, we see how fast he is growing by how tall he is when standing up to take a cookie. We can also see how dangerous his front hooves are if he decided to strike out. This sort of boxing would not likely harm another deer, but could seriously injure a human. The leaves have nearly all fallen, and the woods are very still now, yet very beautiful. We walk along bush roads and forest trails, with Buck taking his time to sample all the good food. It seems that he has learned to look after himself in these places. Knowing he would be in the middle of vegetable cleaning as usual, we set up our cameras to photograph him. Naturally, he had to take part in the setup, but on this warm, sunny day, he soon got tired of the camera business and lay down beside us. We decided to do the same. He enjoys his lazy spell while having his first-year button antlers brushed. Then it's time for another lunch. We finally get back to the vegetable washing with a lot more deer interference. It is not uncommon for wild animals to make friends with people and actually be as tame as any domestic animal. This young snow goose landed in our friend's yard during fall migration to rest and feed before moving on a few days later. Buck's table manners were not the best, but who could refuse a face like this? Besides, it really reduced the leftovers. After looking into the fridge for something good to eat, he might have to be coaxed out of the house with a cookie or candy so that he could continue his eating outside and have his little head and antlers brushed. Since his barley field had been harvested, he was finding many different resting places. With his tummy full, he would slowly walk into the nearby woods to find a suitable bed to sleep in. In a little while, he sees Shirley walking down a pathway and gets up to walk with her. Unless he was getting away from something that might harm him, he was never in a hurry. He liked to carefully and silently pick his steps as he investigated the different odors of animal tracks and resting places of other animals, including those of other deer that have recently passed by. One day, while walking into our yard, Buck noticed a fox eating plums that had either fallen to the ground or were hanging on low branches. The fox stands on his hind legs to reach the sweet fruit and jumps up to get at the higher branches. All this activity is a strange and exciting thing for a deer to watch. Buck's big white tail is up and flared out, along with foot stamping, indicating that something strange is going on here. After the fox leaves, Buck checks out the situation. If the plums are good enough for a fox, they should be good for a deer. After so much excitement, another rest is in order. In so short a time, our dear friend has nearly outgrown all of his fond looks and ways. He knows he's a woodland animal and trots off to spend time in his quiet forest several times a day. He regularly visits other deer that live close by, but he still wants to be near us and comes walking back to the yard. Returning from one of our walks, Buck gave us a surprise. When he came into the house for lunch, he wasn't getting his fruit and vegetables fast enough, so he just helped himself. Then, instead of going outside for his rest, he went into our living room where we found him lying comfortably on the rug. This was the first time he had done this, and would certainly not be the last. Fall days are becoming shorter, and Buck often comes for a drink of milk shortly after daybreak. Although he was getting quite large, he would continue to look for an occasional drink of milk for as long as he stayed with us, even when he was growing his first set of antlers. Hauling away a few leaves of summer gave him a chance to get right into the action. How he loved to play and be close to us. Is it any wonder that we would become so attached to this beautiful, lovable animal? We could also see the signs of how dangerous he could be as he grew into a big, fully antlered deer. We would always have to be on our guard. As he grew older and his leg and foot glands developed, they needed constant attention. Keeping himself meticulously clean was a high priority. As his winter coat thickened, he would regularly lick and straighten out the long, hollow hairs. Finished with his grooming, he contentedly chews his latest meal. The colored leaves of autumn have fallen to the forest floor. Now Buck's gray winter coat blends so well with the sleeping trees and underbrush that he silently drifts through the woodland like a ghost. He walks along a bush road to catch up to us, then we all follow a bush trail in his preferred order, Shirley, Buck, then me. We come to a small pile of logs where we stop to share a few peanuts and raisins with him. It is a warm day, and while lying down to rest and chew his cud, he falls asleep. He enjoyed being a house deer, often sound asleep in our front room or contentedly chewing his last meal while we make a fuss over him. We would also find him lying somewhere in the close-by bush cover. His gray coat blended so well with his surroundings that he was nearly invisible. We could see that he was ready for winter, no matter what it had in store for him, as long as he had plenty of food and shelter. If he could get away with it, he liked to sneak into one of our bedrooms to lie on a bed. We never left him alone anywhere in the house, just in case he might get into some kind of trouble or startled into thinking he was cornered. He might then have taken a wrong escape route. He was always ready to repay any kindness with his warm, friendly licking. We were glad that with a little encouragement from us, he had house-trained himself, asking to be let outside whenever necessary. Shirley pets and talks to him for a moment or two before he lies flat on his side to have a big sleep. We wonder if he will remember this part of his life when he's on his own with wild deer. Buck's first summer with us has ended, and winter is arriving. We finished part 1 of Stolen Hearts with our lovable little friend sound asleep in our front room. He has outgrown his first small mat, so we will be getting him a bigger one soon. He is dreaming, and we can imagine his sleepy head full of all the things young deer dream about. No doubt he is wandering carefree along snow-covered forest trails, finding and feeding on all kinds of winter food that he needs. Sometimes it's tender green twigs or the reddish-brown branches of red dogwood, often referred to as deer candy. Then he finds a few wild rose leaves and sweet pink rose hips that contain many rich nutrients so vital to all kinds of forest animals. Although dry leaves do not look good to us, they're an important part of a deer's fall and winter diet. Nutritious wild fruit providing him with healthy, balanced meals, along with whatever grass he can find in the snow. He likely sees himself when he will be a handsome young prince growing his first set of velvet-covered antlers. In Stolen Hearts Part 2, Buck spends his first winter and second summer with us. Then he joins his own kind in the wild. Don't miss the conclusion to our fascinating story.